This is Henry Sanders back with another episode of Real Talk. You can see I'm smiling, right? So let me first say hello to our sponsors at Park Bank. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for Facebook Journalism Project. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Look, now I haven't been this excited for an interview in a long, long time. And I interview a lot of people, a lot of important people, so there's no shade on anyone else, right? But this person, I have a lot of respect for. Because I believe I really think she's brilliant. I said anytime I talk about her, I always say brilliance. I always put in the same sentence, brilliance. Two, I think a lot of times we have people, especially black folk, we talk a lot, but we don't actually put the work in. And she has been putting the work in for real, like consistently putting in the work. Some of y'all just getting put up on her now, but she's been putting this work in for a minute. Real work, not like just talking about it and real work, like the real work when it counts, when people aren't watching. But now she's kind of like, she's hot in these streets right now. Like you know what I mean? Like everywhere I go, I'm hearing about this name, right? So I'm excited about this. M. Adams, Freedom Inc. What's good?
Thank you for having me, Henry. I'm always happy when you invite me on. So I'm glad that we'll be able to build and talk today.
Yeah. And look, people, I think, I know there's some factions in the community right now and all this stuff, but look, I got nothing but love for M. Adams. Do you feel my love for you?
I do.
Always. Sincerely, do I always show you love?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have none but respect. She contacts me, anything M needs, I give her. That's how much respect I have for him. I don't like a lot of people. I love everyone. But I like and love M. Adams, for real. This is real talk. I really do.
Thank you. I like and love you too.
So, okay, M. All right, M. A lot's been going on in these streets since the last time you and I talked. And last time we talked, it was really like, we had our summit we did a couple weeks ago. So thank you for doing that. And that was really good, informative. But before that, we did it with you and Kaleem, right? And so that seemed like a lifetime ago compared to now. Okay, so let's walk through where we are right now. So I want to get everyone up to speed. We go through COVID-19, the pandemic hits, killing black folks, all Latinx folks, killing us. Got it. Going through that drama. Arbery gets killed, Breonna Taylor gets killed. Then we get to our boy, Mr. Floyd gets murdered in Minneapolis. Freedom Inc., Urban Triage, the other group, are they part of the protests? The socialist group?
Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Okay, I'm gonna get that name messed up right now, so I'm just gonna call you PSL.
Yeah, that's what PSL is, right?
Okay, and so they end up deciding that they're gonna go out and protest, right? And they had this big protest. All the protests across the country. Freedom Inc. really led that here. Urban Triage and PSL really led that protest here, kicked it off. So let's start there. Okay, one, how much coordination and stuff did it take to do a protest like that? I mean, that can't just be easy overnight. How long did it take y'all to do that?
It's a lot of work, so even getting to the point where you make a call to say, let's get in the streets, there's so much work that happens before that moment. So Freedom Inc. is part of the leadership team of the Movement for Black Lives, where we've been together since 2014, since the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson. And since then, we've been intervening on behalf of Black lives and resisting any system that's killing us, murdering us. And we've done a lot of work, particularly around policing. And so when Minneapolis happened, what I mean by that is when the urban rebellion happened, when people were outraged at the murder of George Floyd and said, we're not taking this anymore, went into the streets. As a movement, we made an assessment. As a movement, we said, this is an important opportunity to not only be in defense of Black lives, but also to potentially change the country so that this no longer happens again. And so many of us were supporting folks who were organizing back in Minneapolis. And then we also did what we did in Ferguson, which is not only do you support what's happening there, but you do the work back home. Because what we knew is this is happening to Black people everywhere. That it's not just Black people in Minneapolis who are being oppressed by police terrorism and police forces. It's also happening here in Dane County. And we know this. I mean, there's all types of reports all types of information that just detail the gross racial disparities that we experience here with Madison Police Department, Dane County Jail, and just so many other sectors. And so we put out the call. And Freedom Inc., we very much believe in building movement. And so we want to be as much as possible with people and creating that change. And so we put out a call. We reached out to some partner organizations, Urban Triage. We reached out to the Party for Socialism and Liberation, who had already been doing work around policing. And we knew the leadership of Urban Triage, Brandy Grayson, already from having worked with her back in around
Young,
the
Gifted, and Black.
Young, Gifted, and Black. And we said, we got to intervene. And that's exactly what we did. And it was a lot of work, and this is what I have to tell people, social movements, it's science, right? I'm not just out there experiencing or showcasing my grief, which I think is valid and legitimate, and people get to just show up and be angry. But I'm out there as a scientist thinking about how do we convert rage into transformation, right? How do we take a community from a place of fear and uncertainty to being leaders and creating and forging the new path forward. And so it was a lot of work. There was a lot of planning. There's a lot of conversations. I mean, thousands of people are out there. You can imagine the number of one-on-ones, right? I go and I talk to people. I engage people. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? There's a host of phone calls, a host of this afterward. There's leadership development in it, right? So some of the young people who just showed up as participants, as young teenagers, when they showed up against the murder of Tony Robinson by Madison Police Department, they're now helping to lead, right? And so it's planning, it's training, it's supporting, it's teaching people to read policy, it's teaching people to think critically, it's helping people practice public speaking. I mean, there's so many things that go into making protests be a transformative experience, not just for the external thing you're protesting, but for the people involved.
And you can see, I mean, look, one thing I can give you credit for, and people don't recognize this about me, but I watch everything. I might not say a lot, but I watch and see everything. I mean, on all levels. I do. It's one of my strengths and one of my few strengths. And so I think that I can see how what you just said actually playing out, especially through your youth and the younger voices who are coming out and speaking up. And I know it's you, because they're all on message. So I come from a political background, right? So it's all about messaging. Say the right thing, like you have to be on message. Say it more and more so people can understand it. They all have the same message, consistent messages, right? So that has to come from training. That has to come from training, someone talking to them about it, even their ideology, how they think. Like you say something, they'll come back and say, I'm like, okay. So it's the same way of thinking, how they're processing. Agree or disagree, it takes work to do that, right? Like you actually building a campaign, building a structure around it. So I see it. I mean, I see it. It has to be work. So let's go back to this protest. You have this protest. A lot of people show up, right? So a lot of people show up. You mobilize people, but then the violence happens, right? The white folks come up basically, 2 hours after y'all were there? Was it right? Was it about 2 hours after y'all were there, right? Mm-hmm. How did you respond? How did you feel when that happened? Were you like, man, these people are messing up our thing? Like, we just had this peaceful protest. They're blowing us up. Or did you understand? Like, did you have empathy for what they were doing? Like, how did that hit you?
So one thing that I want to point to is while we were marching, so we began the march at the state capitol, around in that area at the state capitol. We marched around by the jail, and eventually we went down Willie Street to go back to the site where Tony Robinson was murdered. So while we were en route in that area, or maybe even stationed in that area, there's thousands of people, there was a white woman in her car who hit a Black young person on a bike and almost hit two young Black people with the friends. And so when I think about what the violence was, I'm like, that was it, right? Is that she almost killed this person. The bike was completely crushed. The young person was injured. The police knew about it, and, nothing sort of happened. And some of the other protests that we were in, there were white men walking around with these really, really big guns, who were very clear that they were against us and who had some very particular ideas around white supremacy and white nationalism that they wanted to make come true. And so I think when I think of violence, I think of that. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is I actually think it's intellectually dishonest for us as a community to say that we're against violence and not be against all forms of violence, right? And so I don't think that we can care more about a window being shattered than we can care about a Black man who's being choked to death, who has a knee and who's screaming for his mother. I do not think in one hand we can say, we care about boards or glass or whatever on State Street, but dismiss Black homeless people who live there, or arrest them, or put them in cages, or brutalize them, or pepper spray people, or rubber bullet people who are out there protesting within their First Amendment rights. And so for me, I come out of, and I one of the things I appreciate about you, Henry, is you always invite me to bring the fullness of the work that I do. And I come into the work around policing based in my work around domestic violence. So I've been doing that work for about 12 years. And what I've learned from that field, which I think is so important here, is we cannot judge victims by how they fight back. If someone is harming a victim of domestic violence, what we intervene in and what we have concern in is the person who is causing violence to the victim. We never tell a victim they do not have the right to defend themselves, to defend their lives, and that they should not live. We actually fight for victims to be able to survive. And so what that means here is if you consider the Black community as a body, we are the victims of perpetual violence by the state.
For sure.
And so if Black people, if freedom fighters, if supporters of Black life say enough and they resist, and then part of that resisting, some glass gets shattered, glass can be replaced. Right? Glass does not need a funeral. Concrete does not need a burial.
So this is interesting to me because my faith is a big part of what I do, and you know this. And I really believe that. I think you can't separate hate from hate. I think hate is hate. I think violence is violence. I think you can try to separate it, but violence is violence, hate is hate, no matter how you split it. I agree with everything you said. So I have a couple questions for that though. So one, let's talk about, because there were some young Black youth out there doing some stuff downtown, right? There were. Not a lot, but there were some. When they do stuff like, because I think what I hear you saying is, and I heard someone else say this too in our summit, if say we have Black youth doing downtown and they're mad, they're angry, and they do something, break windows, whatever, what do you say to them? Do you intervene and say, don't do that? Young man, young woman, or whoever, or do you say that's okay, let that play out? I'm trying to understand your ideology from that perspective.
So my efforts are focused at uprooting the fundamental issue. So my efforts are focused on working against the police, who I think are the biggest perpetuators of violence, both by directly shooting, murdering, caging, arresting, harassing people, but also they do a tremendous amount of sexual violence. And they also are some of the biggest perpetuators of domestic violence. They say on average, the population, there's domestic violence in 10% of the households, or 10% of households, but within police departments, they're about 40%, right? So Really? We're talking about inside of this profession, at least, and this is what we know, this is based on a study, right? 40% of them are committing domestic violence. And so I just think the amount of violence inside of that institution is where I'm focusing is where I focus my efforts. And so I do not spend time, again, telling Black people how to deal with their rage. I do not spend my time redirecting Black people to resist in ways that the power structure thinks is more palatable. That is not where I spend my efforts. I spend my efforts focusing and concentrating on what is the perpetuator, what is the starter, what is the root of the violence, and digging in that. And something that I want to point out is I think a lot of times people misunderstand. So people might say, okay, well, I could get it if they were down at the police district and maybe a police window got bust out. Like some people make that argument. Mm-hmm. And then they say, well, what does this store have to do with it? I think something that people don't understand is the amount of concentrated violence against Black people. And what I mean by concentrated is we have to think about how Black people experience the world, right? So a Black person, and this is why I think what happened with George Floyd, John Crawford, some of these folks are so important because they were killed around places of business, right? They were killed, they were workers, they were people who participated in the economy or who were trying to participate in the economy. And what Black people are saying is, I am being murdered by the police, yes. There's a single officer I can point to. There's a gun I can point to, a knee on the neck that I can point to. But I am also being made victim by a capitalist system that is exploiting me, right? So people are saying we want the police out. We also want out all these other things that exploit us. So all these jobs that don't pay us enough, all these jobs that overcharge us, all these jobs that disrespect us, that harass us, that follow us, all of this fight that I'm doing. You know how many Black people are essential workers amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and they can't even afford the thing they're working for, right? So people are saying, when we say in defense of Black life, we're against all things that harm Black life. So for the Black person who may not be able to say, hey, our strategy here is to resist in this way because we're also fighting, you know, racist gendered capitalism in addition to police terrorism, fine, maybe they didn't give you the sentence, but that's the experience, right? And so I understand that. And again, I challenge, I say to people, we have to approach this scientifically because other rebellions, other forms of resistance have done the same thing. July 4th is coming. Was that peaceful, right? Was the quote unquote American Revolution peaceful? Did they not loot the British? Did they not, try to challenge the tax? Did they not dump the tea? Did they not burn the city? Did they not, right? So what I'm trying to point out here isn't even so much that we really need to debate the forms of resistance, but really what's at the heart of it is who has the right to resist? Who has the right to defend? And that's what the fundamental question is do people have a self-worthy to defend? Can Black people say, we will do what all oppressed people have done, which is to resist in all of these forms? And will that be seen as legitimate by this society?
This is why, you just said so much. I hope people paid attention to what you just said, because you said so much. You took it back to history and the Tea Party stuff. So, but I have a question for you though. Okay, so Black folks, going back to these few Black folks. I'm not even talking about the white folks. I mean, that's their issue, right? And that's not my focus, at least. So talking about our Black youth and you're saying, let them talk about their anger, etc. Okay, they should be able to express themselves, but also by them expressing themselves, that can catch them. Those people, those kids who express themselves wrongly, we're going to get locked up. They're going to get felonies. They're going to get, so that stuff, there's an impact to their actions. So what they're doing, right? So it's I agree with what you're saying. People should be able to express themselves. And I never thought from a victim mentality, what you said that people are, if you're a victim, you should never judge the victim how they respond, which is deep. That is deep on so many levels. I have to really think that part through. However, still, we know if we do something, if these kids do something wrong, we know there's going to be ramifications to it. And then we know that can ruin their lives forever. The system is what it is. If you're Black and you go in the system, you're going to stay in the system most likely. And that's it for them. So there has to be a balance there, right? You let them say, yes, that's your rage, and respond, but also recognize that there's going to be some ramifications to that, right?
Yeah, and and this is why that's what you just asked is so important. And it's so important because I think we've reached the Rubicon. We've reached the moment that we cannot turn back from, which is the reality, which is a reckoning that for Black people, for those young Black people, they are no more likely to be incarcerated if they resisted than if they did not. Mm-hmm. And that is what it means to be Black. It means to be in a precarious living situation. It means that you are in a county that arrests Black adults 11-1, and the population is nearly the reverse. It means you are in a county where I think the youth, Black youth to white youth incarceration rate is 15-1. You are in a county where if you were to walk into where youth are detained, they are all Black. And I would even argue all of those people historically prior to this moment were there without this resistance. without the need to rebel. And that is what it means to be Black. And so this is where we are. So even we can extend that question and say, is there a ramification for saying people come out during COVID? Well, if you're Breonna Taylor and you're home sleep and you're a health worker, you're social distancing, you will be murdered in your sleep, because that is the unfortunate devastation of anti-Blackness in this country. And so I think that is what those Black people are demonstrating. And I think people are looking at them and saying, there's another path, there's another way. And the challenge then is to the system will show me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Prove it. Show me the site where these numbers aren't true.
Okay. All right. Look. Okay.
Look at the schools. What's happening to our folks? I mean,
you're right. No, you're right. Like, you're right. Our schools, I think that's a really, really, really good point, is what's the alternative? If you're telling me not to do something and you're already going to lock me up, the chance I'm going to be locked up anyways, I might as well go out how I want to go out, right? And go out how I want to vent. I get it's deep. That's deep for me. I mean, that actually that's disheartening on a lot of levels, right? So, I mean, that's disheartening because part of that is saying there's no hope. Part of that is saying that, yes, you can vent and break windows, do whatever you want to do, because there's no hope in the system. There's no hope. So you're either going to get locked up one way or the other. So do you.
And one way to approach, so one conclusion to draw, and you're right, is this sense of desperation. And I do think so many of our folks are hurting and feeling no solution. So you're right. One place to stop is to say, there's no hope, nothing matters, right? And we hear our folks talk about that in a variety of forms. We hear our folks who are struggling with depression, who are struggling to make ends meet, who feel shame, who feel a host of other things, right? Like, that is real. So we know about that. What I'm inviting into Black people, and what I'm inviting actually into all people who value Black life, is an opportunity to move to hope, is an opportunity to move to creating a different world. And it is in this realization, that's why you meet freedom fighters, and we can say with conviction we would give our lives. Because we understand the calculation. We understand that what we're against is a certain death if you're Black, because that's what is designed. It is social death, as many people call it, being locked out of schools, not seeing yourselves reflected in culture, being demoralized, not being able to wear your hair the way you want to wear it, being underpaid, not even being able to protect your children against an institution or a state, not being able to protect yourself, being able to be humiliated or thrown into a cage and not being able to do anything about it, not having institutional recourse when someone harms you, right? All of that, that's what we're talking about, right? And in liberal spaces, we oftentimes look at the outcomes of it as like racial disparities, but all of those things is a form of almost a social death, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we stay there, we will be depressed. But if we take on the challenge or the invitation of movement, which is to say, look, become a warrior of the cause, move into your power, move into consciousness, become a rebel against the things that seek to kill you. Lucille Clifton beautifully said it in the poem. Won't you celebrate with me? For every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
That'd be every day for me. I mean, that's Black folks.
And that is the invitation she is sending to Black folks.
Okay, so one, this is just such good stuff. Okay, so I agree with what you're saying. I like the end goal. I agree with what you're saying. And I agree that we have to give people hope. And I think our kids have a lack of identity of who they are, specialty and Blackness. And I think we lack that identity of being Black and what it means. And I think it's one of the downsides being in Madison is that we put our identity in how a progressive agenda, a progressive white agenda sees us, and we kind of assimilate to that model instead of seeing our Black beauty. That's how our true identity, our culture. So I agree about empowerment and all that stuff. Who do you say you fit more in the lane of? And I know this is like cliches, but are you like more in the Malcolm X lane, or are you more in the Martin Luther King lane? Because I'm asking because like you said something on the Summit the other day that you're like, Martin did this and that, but he still got killed, right? And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, so did Malcolm, so like, what lane do you fit in that more of? I'm just curious.
I think, both Malcolm and Martin were very complex. And if you were to look at sort of their political thoughts and where they started and where they ended,
Very similar.
Right.
Yep.
So the question depends on, I can't really say this or this, but I can talk about ideas. Where would I have landed on particular ideas? But bringing up the Martin thing that I raised, which is important, that goes back to your former question, is, we want to, right now, people champion Martin Luther King. And I have to remind people, he was hated then.
Really hated then. Even by the church, black folks, he was extremely hated.
And murdered.
Yes.
And this is what I mean about this calculation. You can go about it in a way that society would say peacefully, right? Which is you write the letters, you do the petitions, you do the marches, you don't fight back, you get brutalized, you get killed, but you just keep marching. There's certain death in that too, right? Because he is resisting, or they were resisting, not just Dr. King, but several others, Rosa Parks and many other incredible leaders of that time were resisting a thing that was set out to kill them. The same was true for Malcolm, right? And this goes back to not judging a victim how they fought. They fought differently. They both had scientific assessments about what they thought would help them advance.
Okay, so see, this is why I love this conversation. So you and I say a lot of the same stuff. We say it differently, and I think some of our tactics are different, but we say the same thing. Okay, so one. Two questions. One, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, even Malcolm X, all came from a faith perspective. That was all driving them. That was their core of driving them, of their why. I would say it's important why you're doing it, because the why is what keeps you going when people are hating on you, when you're tired. That's what pushes you night in, night out, when you don't see any hope. That's the thing that pushes you through, right? So me, it's my faith. Martin was his faith. Rosa Parks was faith. Malcolm X was his faith. What's your why? Like, what keeps you motivated to do this? I'm just curious what that is. And two, let's talk about, I want to come back to this different tactics, right? And appreciate different tactics, because there's some division right now in our community about tactics and who's doing what and how they're doing it. So I think those are fascinating things you just said from a scientific perspective. Like you said, going to about being a victim, you can't talk about how the victim responds. They might respond differently, but they're still responding. So let's first start with what's your why?
So I too am, I have a very significant spiritual root. So I'm more spiritual than I am religious. So I don't subscribe to one particular faith ideology. I'm learning more about African-based spiritual systems, and I am finding a lot of nourishment there, a lot of connection there, and I am deepening the practice inside of that. And so the one that I know that I feel connected to and knowing about is Candomblé, which has roots in Brazil, but comes out of West Africa. And so I do feel a connection to my ancestors. I do feel connected to something beyond the flesh and all of those other things. I also was raised by a grandmother who was a Christian, who was an usher for 50 years in the Church of God in Christ. And so I also was raised with some of that sentiment as well. And so I do think you're right? Like we are guided by something bigger. We're guided by something bigger that people may not be able to see. And that doesn't mean everybody's a Christian or a Muslim, even for people who may not be, who may even identify as atheists who are Black, I think would have a level of reverence for our ancestors and a level of connection to a broader we that really guides and centers us through the fight. And so that's what really keeps me going, is this being connected to this thing bigger than me, because you're right. What else will keep me going with all the things that are against me, right? And it's actually the strength that I draw from. And it's part of what allows me to be brave, because it is not just him standing here. It is a legacy that is propelling me to be here, to be in front of us. But you said, okay, back to the tactics thing. So I think, I think both are legitimate. I think what nonviolent civil disobedience movement work was able to do, and how it was able to advance a fight of civil rights against the system of Jim Crow is really important. And I will also point to, there's an important book. It's called This Nonviolent Shit Will Get You Killed. And it talks about the armed resistance inside of the civil rights movement. So Dr. King, while he was marching, did not have a weapon because he was engaged in a nonviolent action. However, in his home where he was moving through the world, there were weapons around him. He had a weapon to protect himself. And so I think people cannot misconstrue the tactic of resisting in public a particular way with the will of a person to want to live and protect their body. And that's sometimes what people do. People then make the conclusion like, well, King was not violent, so what does that mean? I'm supposed to let somebody shoot me, right? He didn't try to let anybody shoot him. There were people around him, bodyguards and stuff whose job it was to make it not happen, right? But it just happened to happen. But I'm saying that to say King believed in self-defense, whether or not people would say that. He didn't advocate for an armed response in terms of organizing, but he believed in Black people's ability to defend themselves. And so I think it's important that people know that. And it's, in terms of the work of the Nation of Islam, and in particular Malcolm X, I think it was so important. I think what they offered and what they taught, and really why I think people love Malcolm to this day, is he said, you are worthy to be defended. You have a self that can be defended. You are a person who should not allow someone to beat you, someone to maim you. He said he showed and demonstrated what so many people feel, which is like, get off of me. You can't do this to me. We have the right to be. And I think that was so important into building the Black consciousness at that same time. And what's clear to me is that movement would not have been what that movement was without either one of them.
I totally agree with that. And I think at the end, they agree. I mean, even Malcolm went to Selma at the end before Martin got there and said, look, either y'all go this way or it's going to go my way. So figure it out. So from a tactics standpoint, let's talk about your tactics by going to the school boards and you and your team really just making, I don't know how the right way to say it. Like, you guys are definitely making sure that people know you're there. You guys go to, I think you were there. Did you go to Gloria Reyes' house with okay. And going to Gloria, you guys went to Gloria Reyes' house and, really got assertive. And I wasn't there, so I don't know. I can see pictures of flags up and all that stuff. But those are really in your face tactics, right? Why? I mean, just why that tactic?
So I think people should understand that if we could solve this by simply writing a letter, we would have solved it already, right? If there was another form, if there was another way, if there was another proven method to go about creating the change, we would have already engaged it. And the fact that we've sent thousands of postcards to the homes of school board members. And by we, I mean the broader community. These are all written by different people writing in. This is why police officers need to be removed. This is why we need to invest in youth. This is why communities need control over the schools and have decision-making power. We've done that. If it's about engaging in school board meetings, as you raised, we've done it. We've done hundreds of hours of protest. And I'm talking about young people who've studied policy, young people who practice writing out their speeches, practice speaking it to one another, who are recruiting other youth to join them, who are educating their parents on what's happening, who are letting the community know, who are learning social media and digital organizing skills. Like, we've done all of that. And we had been at the school board far longer than people even knew. It was not until young people, until freedom fighters said, we are going to disrupt what is happening. Because the methods that we just took did not stop what you all were doing, right? We would go and protest for hours and they would still make the same decisions. We would go and protest for hours, they would still dismiss the voices of the young people. We'd send in thousands of postcards and they would still act like nobody said no police in schools. And so it is not until power is directly confronted that change happens. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand, right? And so we have to organize ourselves and force demand onto the system. And that's exactly what we're doing. And even King did that. Even Dr. King, right?
For
Nonviolent
sure.
disobedience is a confrontation of power. And so we
No
confront
question.
power. And I will say, no matter how you confront power, if you're Black, they will criticize it, right? Because right now, they're trying to say we're good and peaceful. When we did the exact same thing during YGB, they said we were terrorists, right? And so who gets to interpret what's righteous or not righteous in terms of resistance is oftentimes the one causing the harm.
You said so much here, but that's still to address though. Like, so for me, going to someone's house though, that could end up ugly, right? I mean, that confrontation could have ended up violent. I mean, like you going to someone's house and confronting someone. I mean, that could have been ugly, right? I mean, did that cross the line to you? That wasn't like going to her house didn't cross the line.
No, because the police come to our houses every day. Yes. With license to kill and weapon to do it, law to back them, and culture to support it. And if you believe in that, and she believes in this, if you advocate for policing, then you advocate for the ability of a group to organize and to confront you in your home. That's exactly what policing is. You advocate for that. So you cannot say they have the right to continuously do it, and we can't come here and ask you a question. And that, to be clear, that's what happened. You were forced to answer some questions.
But y'all did leave flags in the house and all that stuff. I mean, you know.
Police leave citations and all other kinds of things. Notices, rules, they do all kinds of stuff.
What I love about you is very consistent in your way of thinking. Okay, so so let's talk about the police. Are all police evil? Are all police bad? Because I think what I just are all. You're not saying all police are evil, are you? Are all of them bad?
I'm actually not saying anything about an individual officer. What I'm saying is the system of policing is bad. So much like if a country was being occupied by an army, and we wouldn't be saying, well, all the soldiers aren't bad, are they? Are some of the soldiers nice? Do some of the soldiers speak the language? Do some of the soldiers like kids? It actually doesn't matter. The issue is that the militarization is bad. The military should not be occupying this foreign country. The military needs to leave. That is the same position that we have with policing. It doesn't actually matter because the system itself is in a power position to dominate. The domination altogether is bad. So you can, I don't know, maybe you can dominate nicely. Maybe you can dominate with a smile. But it actually doesn't matter when the consequence is still the same. And this is what we can find. Whether or not you have a police chief who people think is nice and sensible and Black, like Noble Ray, you still have a similar outcome in the Black community. That is because the system of policing is bad. We are not interested in good cops. We are interested in no cops.
So what happens if someone who's Black does crime, shoots someone, breaks in someone's house, steals cars, does some type? I'm not talking about like the marijuana stuff. I'm talking like some violent acts.
Yep. So a couple things. Yep. A couple of things would happen as we. And so I'll just say this here. So I'm an abolitionist, and what that means is I do not think we should be using policing and prisons to solve our social issues. That does not mean there are not social issues, which you just asked me about, but it means that that's not what we should use. So getting rid of policing does two things. One, it puts $100 billion back into the economy, into communities. Currently, this country is spending hundreds of billions of dollars on policing. I just took a look at the local Madison budget. A significant chunk of it is into policing, right? So already, and this is how we got here. We didn't wake up with policing as though it was a natural thing, right? It didn't rain and then the sun came out and there was policing. It's not natural. It was invested in. A group of people chose to do it. Law and policy went into it, and they kept pouring and pouring and pouring and investing into this, regardless of what regardless of what the data was, regardless of what the recommendations were, regardless of what community was saying. And so we have such a big policing system because it was heavily invested in. So we would take that same amount of investment. And so what I'm talking about is one, money. the amount of money that we've been putting into policing over hundreds of years, the same money, we would redirect that into solving our social issues. Not only will we take the money, we're going to take the personnel. Instead of training our people to become people who are trained to kill children, because that's what a police officer can do. That's what makes a police officer different than a social worker. One of them has been trained on the ability to cage and kill people and has license to do it. Instead of putting a person trained to do that in a school, we'll put someone trained to do mental health, trained to do conflict resolution that's healthy for kids. We would also develop social contracts instead of laws that are based on restoring people, transforming people, and not caging people and killing people. And so doing that alone will help to end a lot of what we call crimes of poverty.
I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm talking about from a practical perspective, because I know one of your things is letting all people out of jail, right? Letting everyone out of jail. You let some people out of jail, and some of our folks are dangerous, like no doubt. Like some of our folks will hurt you for some of the reasons you're talking about: systematic racism, broken family, all that stuff. All that stuff is real, right? And some of that has led to some of our youth, or some people in general, who are broken, who are doing violent things because they're, like you said, they're victims. They're responding however you want they're responding. We have some people who are dangerous, who look like me and you, who will hurt me and you right now. If they're on the streets, they will hurt you and me right now. You let them out of jail. You let them out of prison. The plan you're talking about is a long, more systematic process. Short term, how do you deal with them?
So the short answer is we're dealing with many of them right now outside of prison. The majority of people who commit or who do these really harmful things like sexual violence, rape, domestic violence, all of these, the majority of them are not locked up. So that's the first thing, is we have to have a reckoning and a digging up the truth about what policing is and what it isn't. So because many of us get to watch these Law and Order episodes, we think that that's really what's happening with policing. But the majority of these really horrible incidents of violence are actually not being dealt with at all. So we're having to figure out how to deal with them right now with little resource. So what I'm proposing is stop the charade. That's not what y'all doing anyways. Instead, let's transfer those resources to the people in the front lines right now who are actually trying to intervene and do it. Like people who really work on domestic violence, people who really work on sexual violence. The answers are there. We just need to invest in them, right? The other thing is, I do believe in accountability. We do believe in accountability around harm. We're saying that the accountability should actually end the harm and not just make it worse. If somebody is really harming people and they have mental health issues, these people need therapy. That's the only way you're going to deal with that. These people need resources. These people need opportunities to transform. Putting someone in a cage because they're angry and they got in a fight or they beat up somebody, putting them in a cage doesn't make them less violent. When you release them, which they get released, they come out more violent. Because when you put anyone in a cage, I don't care who it is, if you put anyone in a cage, it harms you. It warps you psychologically. It devastates you. It makes you angry. It makes you act out harm. It forces you into a underdeveloped fight or flight mode all of the time. And so we are saying we can't keep doing that because it's making the problem worse, actually. And that's what we're saying. It is actually making it worse.
Okay. So I want to, before we go, I want to talk about this Vice column, this column with a conservative journalism from Milwaukee, and I think I think his theory is that your budget at Freedom Inc. is what I think it said $3.3 million. Mm-hmm. Which in Dane County would probably make you the second biggest budget for a Black-led behind Boys and Girls Club, probably. I think Urban League's budget's maybe around $2 million. So if yours is 3.3, you're probably right behind the Boys and Girls Club Dane County is probably my guess. And let me pause there for a second, because before I go into this question, it's understand people have to understand what I'm saying. One, I think all Black organizations doing the work are under-resourced in this county. For all the disparities that we have, $3.3 million is a bucket into what we should be doing, how much money we really need to address these issues that have been historically over generations. So I think every Black organization who's actually doing the work and being effective need a lot more money to do what they're doing. So I'm asking just from a perspective of not taking shots at Freedom Inc. I'm saying I want her to be able to respond to what Mr. Bice is saying. Okay, so he's saying that you guys got $3.3 million. That's your budget. Over the past 5 years, I think he said that you raised $3.6 million from the federal government. Not the federal government, but the government, because someone I know comes from the state. And so I think his reason was that the government should not be giving you funds to they said in read the article that they should not be giving you funds to terrorize and loot. So how would you respond to that? Because I understand what he's trying to do, but how would you respond to that?
So I think that the government has a responsibility to affirm Black life. The government has a responsibility to defend and to protect Black life. And so the government should be investing its resources into organizations like mine, into other organizations who are doing the important work of helping to build the community, who are helping to affirm and support and nurture and develop out Black life. The government should not be investing not 1 cent into systems that murder Black life, and the police do that. So that's the first thing. He and I have a fundamental difference about what the role of the government is. It appears to me that Mr. Bice thinks that the role of the government is to harm Black people. If you believe that the government should be spending its resources, the majority of its resources, significant chunks of its resources into policing, then you believe that the government should be murdering Black people because that's what the police are doing. Or you believe that the government should be disproportionately incarcerating, sexually harassing, committing domestic violence, all the things that the police do, then that is your belief. That is not my belief system. So we'll start there. The other thing that's interesting about the article is it appears that Mr. Bice went hoping to have government partners that we have worked with who, and I want to be very clear, who support our domestic violence and sexual assault work. So as I mentioned, so much of what we do is about addressing harm inside of our community. We know that there's harm there. I'm a survivor of harm inside of the community. Our staff members are survivors of the harm inside of our community. We just believe another way is possible to address and to end the harm. And the government, the funders have agreed with that. They think that we're doing incredible work, right? So I think where he was seeking to maybe dislodge support for Freedom Inc.'s grassroots intervention in trying to address gender-based violence, I think what he saw is that Freedom Inc. is actually doing this work. We're actually doing the really difficult work of working with survivors, helping to meet their needs as best as possible with case management, trying to find creative solutions, community-based solutions to meeting some of the bigger needs that can't be covered inside of a grant, and also organizing to fundamentally end the issue. We're not just simply trying to manage domestic violence or manage sexual violence, we're trying to end it. And so we are doing some of these bigger picture things. We are doing some of the out of the box work to advance that. And the other thing that I'll say is that we are proud. We're very proud of our work. We do not keep secret what our work is. When we engage with the government and community partners, we tell them we're seeking to develop solutions to gender-based violence that are not reliant upon prison and policing systems. We're very clear about that in our work. We're very clear about how so many of our survivors don't actually seek the police for help. We're very clear about the amount of criminalization that happens to Black women when they do report. Think about Marissa Alexander, right? A Black woman in Florida, same place where Trayvon Martin was murdered. She shoots a gunshot in the air because she's being beat or fears for her life. And this is in the stand your ground law, right? Where George Zimmerman gets off for murdering Trayvon Martin. She shoots a gun in the air, doesn't hurt anybody, it's her own house. The police show up and murder her. The police show up to arrest her, and she has to do years in prison. Because she's Black, they don't think that she has a ground to stand, right? And so I bring that up to talk about what happens to Black survivors who do call the police for help. We have Sierra Finkley right here in Madison, Wisconsin, who called the police several times for help because the man she was once dating was trying to kill her, tried to run her over with a car, her and her daughter. He comes, he breaks down the door, she gets in a fight for her life, and he dies as a result of that fight. The police showed up right away and arrested her for murder. And so we're aware of how many Black survivors don't actually use the police, and when they do use them, they get criminalized. They get caught murderers. They get arrested too. The amount of Black women who call for help and the police show up and arrest them because they're a victim and they fought back, right? And so what I think, so to me, the questions that I'm interested in engaging the readership of people who read the article is not about if Freedom Inc. has received money to do the work. We're very clear. We do domestic violence work. We do sexual assault work. We do our jobs very well, and our grantors know that, right? The question really is what does the reader think the role of the government is? And what does the reader think that the government should invest in? Should the government invest in people who are saying there's another path forward and it's the responsibility of the government to support Black life? And if so, then they should write in to Mr. Bice and let them know that. They should write in and say, hey, this is a great organization. They have an approach. We want to try this out. They should say, hey, Mr. Bice, we noticed that you're really poking at this organization who's doing important work, but you're not poking in at other people who are doing way less, who get way more. And so I think that that's important. What I actually think would be interesting, a very interesting study, and something that Mr. Bice should take up since he's interested in tracking government spending, is he should track the amount of money that the policing has gotten over that same amount of time. So you know how much Freedom Inc. has gotten in 5 years? How much did the police get over the 5 years? And how much of that money was disproportionately spent and resulted in incarceration of Black people and murder of Black people? Because we didn't arrest anybody and we didn't kill anybody.
I have so many more questions. We can go on and on forever, but I'm gonna let this ride out because I have so many more questions for you. But we've already gone past our normal time here. It's about 50 minutes in. Thank you for coming on Real Talk. Thank you for answering these questions. These are real questions. She's answering them fully. And I want to say this too. Like Freedom Inc., hate Freedom Inc., whatever, they have sincerely put in the work. You might disagree with their tactics, but there's a lot of organizations out here who are saying lots of stuff and, doing whatever, but there's very few people I would say who are actually being effective and are actually doing the work, who are Black-led organizations who are actually doing the work. There's no question, none, zip, zero, if Freedom Inc. is doing what they're saying they're doing. You might not like it, but they are actually putting in the work. And I can say that from my own credibility watching all these organizations. So like it, love it, hate it, whatever, Freedom Inc. is putting in the work. It is what it is. So thank you, M, for all that you're doing. Stay healthy, and we'll get together offline and talk a little bit, okay?
Excellent. Take care. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll see you next time in Real Talk.